Hello and welcome to episode 397 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark. Now on today's episode, I'm joined by two guests, Eduardo Sánchez and Daniel Myrick. Yes, the writers, directors and editors of the Blair Witch Project. Being a huge horror fan, this is a massive one for me. I still remember the day I went to see the Blair Witch and genuinely shat myself. It was a film that stuck with me for a long time. It felt like a movie that was just a phenomenon. It was just insane the way that the industry changed, and then we had this influx of found footage films. But for me, this was one of the first, and they did it right. And it's still one that now has a cult status, and I love that I get to sit down and talk to both directors today. But in true typical Mark and Me fashion, I always like to use the intro to talk about my previous episode, and it was another horror legend. I was joined by Nicholas Vince, an extremely popular interview. It's only been out a couple of days, but thanks to Fright Fest and Nicholas and all the horror fans out there who've shared this, it's been one of my most popular ever first day downloaded podcasts, so thanks so much. The stories we got to talk about for Nightbreed and obviously the amazing Hellraiser were brilliant, and I can't wait to get Nicholas back on the podcast in the near future. But today it's all about the Blair Witch Project, and just before I give it you, let's just quickly touch base and talk about the podcast sponsor, Vice Press. Those guys bring out the best posters out there. They're huge friends of the podcast, and Matt and James do an amazing job to offer exclusive official licensed prints, collectibles, and all these amazing things to do with film. So if you're in the market for anything to do with horror or TV or film, they truly have the best work out there with the best artists. And the good thing is, if you go on vicepress.com, once you're on the site, you will get 10% off if you use the code MarkandMe10. It's that simple to get 10% off your first order, but also I have put a link on the episode notes today to click and take you straight there. So please, if you go and treat yourself, use that discount code and you will not regret it. Right, let's get to today's interview. It's Blair Witch. It's Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sánchez talking all things horror. So Ed and Dan, welcome to the Mark and Me podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I really appreciate your time today. What I do with all guests that come on the podcast, I've been going 7 years now, nearly 400 episodes. I've had all different people from all different walks of life, and I'm really intrigued. When both of you were growing up, what was that first film you saw? Maybe at the cinema or at home, maybe someone gave you a VHS or Betamax or something, but that first experience that you remember as a kid that made you think, wow, I absolutely love film.
I think for me, like the most poignant memory I have was going into like Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh wow!
I was sort of into like UFOs. I had like a UFO subscription to several magazines, and Bigfoot was big back in the late 70s and early 80s and stuff like that. So I was kind of into all that sort of stuff. And had a little UFO club in my neighborhood, which was silly, but we had a good time with it. And
that
then
sounds cool to me.
Yeah, then Close Encounters came out, and it was like the first movie where the aliens were like friendly, they were like not, malevolent, and it just struck a chord with me. It was just so well done and had so many layers of meaning to it. And I just came out of the theater like completely blown away and thinking this is how I want to make people feel at a movie theater. I want them to have this kind of feeling. I want to be able to find a way to do this. And that's, I think, where it sort of transitioned for me. Like maybe there's a way to figure out how to make these kinds of movies. And that's, I think, was a sort of a defining moment for me. There's a lot of films that helped influence that process, but I think that was like one of those moments for me.
It's an incredible starting point, and now I'm thinking, is Ed going to be able to top that, or is he going to fall flat on his face?
Well, yeah,
that's hell of a bar.
For me, it was, like like my dad was, he's a, immigrant from Cuba. We came from Cuba when, I got here when I was like 5 years old, and my dad loved movies. Like, even though he didn't understand the language, he just loved movies. So I think my earliest like kind of love of film was going to the theater with my dad, or just watching, movies with my dad on TV. He would love the James Bond movies, because anything action, anything kind of slapstick comedy, that's what he liked. But then, from I think, as like far as like filmmaking is concerned, Star Wars, as you can see from my background, it
I'm trying
had
not to be distracted because I keep talking to you and I'm like, oh my God,
I
look what
know.
he's
Well,
got in the
yeah,
background. Is that an original? And
it's ridiculous. But just, that's the first thing that's the first movie that like made me interested in like how did they do that? Like, kind of what Dan was saying, is that how the hell did they make this happen? So that's when I started buying, just whatever books I could afford, filmmaking books. And um I went to see it a bunch of times. And then, I just went to the movies a lot with my friend, and I really started trying to figure out how they did these special effects and the script. And I learned about George Lucas and the fact that he had done American Graffiti, which was also another one of my favorite movies. And I was like, wow, that's, it's the first time I like kind of had connected like a filmmaker to like a body of work. And then, of course, after that, Spielberg, I felt the same way about Close Encounters and, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Jaws. I mean, like, it's just like, how can you not be affected, at our age by those movies? But really, I think Star Wars was the thing that kind of like got me interested in how the hell you make these movies. And even though, I grew up in, I think Dan and I grew up about as far away from Hollywood as possible. He grew up in Florida. I grew up in Maryland, near DC, and I know, but I didn't know any filmmakers. I didn't even know what the hell a filmmaker was. But and I didn't think that I was going to be a filmmaker, but I felt like, man, this is really cool. I would love to like kind of learn more. And then eventually later on, I realized, yeah, maybe, foolishly, that maybe I can do it. Maybe I can do it, and that later on in high school. But yeah, I think Star Wars for me was really the thing that kind of just sparked, because it was just such a, like Dan was saying about Close Encounters, it was just something that you had never seen before, and it was just like, just even to this day, like I see that first opening shot of Star Wars, and I'm like, it's still like that Star Destroyer going over. It's like, it's still like so effective, like that first sequence. And I'm like, this movie is like, I guess what, almost 50 years old. It's freaking ridiculous.
with my own personal taste and growing up, John Carpenter's The Thing was one of the first films my dad got to sit me down and watch, and then Jaws, and I was like instantly drawn to the fact that it wasn't CGI, it wasn't all these big computer effects. And then the older I've got and the wiser I've learned, the obviously practical filmmaking now makes me realize why I love Poltergeist, why I love all these early films, because they look timeless. They look great because for me, they don't age. When you use a really good practical effect, like in The Thing, it holds up today. And I wondered when you were both getting into the idea of making a film or becoming an actual reality of putting a story to screen, was that something you had in mind that you didn't want to go overboard and you wanted it to be real, that's something you could actually hold in your hands?
Yeah, I mean, everyone overuses the word authenticity, but there is a certain value,
Yeah,
I think, um, to me, when whatever effect, or whatever you're doing, it has to contribute to the story. If it detracts, or if it distracts from the story or character, then it's defeating your goal. And I think that's the problem with a lot of CGI. They just get caught up in the ability of what it can do, and as a tool, and it gets overused. But I'm not against CGI, but to
no,
me, just the best implement of it is when you don't know it's there. That's another thing that I appreciate about the Spielbergs of the world, is that they integrate CGI so seamlessly, and you don't even know it's really being incorporated. So
yeah,
that to me, is so important, because, like you said, films that feel um, authentic, and they feel grounded in the story, and the sense of place, and the reality that you've created, the world that you've created, they'll have a timeless quality about them. They won't show their technical limitations later on down the road. And that's, I think, what you try to do, I mean, and it's very seductive to want to have all these tools and play with them and use them as a filmmaker. And I've said this 100 times. I think that was one of the kind of happy accidents with Blair was that because we were so limited on
Yeah.
our budget, it forced us to sort of be inventive. It forced us to streamline and to go minimalist on a whole bunch of our approaches and our effects on the movie. Had we had a bigger budget, we may have attempted something stupid like, a witch costume or an alien costume in the end or something like that. But I think it holds up because it doesn't try to do that. It just leaves much to the imagination. And any effects that we did do or gags that we did pull, we wanted to keep them organic and practical. And that's, I think, very hard to duplicate with artificial means, I think.
Less is more, isn't it? And I think Jaws is my favorite film of all time. And the best parts of Jaws are when you don't see anything. You just see
Yeah,
this,
I mean,
just see
and
the
it's the
ocean, and
setup. I mean, if
yeah,
if you look at the script, it's a genius script, and
yeah,
and how they lay the pipe for this shark. So by the time you're in the water, you freaking got the biggest freaking shark in your head, swimming around with you, right? And it's
yeah.
just so it's a combination of great script writing, great direction and execution, and that minimalism that you're talking about really is very, very effective.
And surely, Ed, with Blair Witch, that's the kind of same process that works. It's not ever seeing the witch, is it? It's seeing everything but the witch, or feeling that the witch is there, but not actually having it in front of you. It's all about letting your imagination do the storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, Dan and I've been talking about the fact that, like, a lot of the, I mean, Blair Witch began with like our love of, the pseudo documentaries from the 70s, like, Legend of Boggy Creek and that TV show In Search of, um, just that creepy way to actually, put the material to build the movie. But the inspiration was just a lot of just camping trips where you were in the middle of the woods and you wake up at 2 a.m. and there's something outside and it's probably a small animal, but you think it's, at least to us, it's like, oh, that's Bigfoot or that's a freaking bear. And the thing about it is that you can't see anything. All you're doing is getting these clues from footsteps. Is that a man? Are those human footsteps? Does that sound like an animal? And I think your imagination just kind of takes over and creates something that's horrifying, and that's what we wanted to create with Blair Witch. First of all, because we thought we didn't have any money to do anything else, and also Blair Witch was really a time before like CGI became like
Yeah.
crazy. It was still very in its infancy. And we couldn't afford it even if we wanted to do it. So there was this, we were just limited but like Dan said, we were limited by our budget. So we had to rely on the audience's imaginations and we just kind of set it up and let it go and hoped that the audience would get into it so much that they would could imagine something akin to like I think Dan and I talk about the fact that Blair Witch is probably closer to like a radio drama
Yeah.
of the past
That's
than
fair.
a movie. It does have some crazy visuals, but it's mostly just audio. Most of the time when the characters are talking, you don't even see them. They're behind the camera. So that was kind of the kind of the main thing that that's the main tool we had. Really, that's it was the audio really was our CGI. You know what I mean? And I remember being in the mixing room and like just trying to find the right sounds for the footsteps and trying to make it enough where you could feel that it's a human, but not enough where you feel that it's like some monster or something, like just enough to make it creepy and okay, there's something out there moving. It doesn't sound like an animal. There's just that level of detail that Dan and I like really spent a long time trying to figure out those scenes and trying to make them perfect. But so so that, yeah, I mean that's the whole thing of independent filmmaking is the lack of resources creates leads to ingenuity. So and it's always like that.
I'm sure you get this question a lot, but it's something that I'm very intrigued by. I've never seen since Blair Witch a marketing campaign done so successfully, and I think it's for the time and the place. You couldn't do it now because of TikTok and Twitter and Facebook. It wouldn't have the same impact. But were you ever able to kind of take a step back and digest just how much of an impact your film had so quickly? Like the fact that the film came out, you could never anticipated that it blew up and was the kind of green and blueprint now for found footage for horrors, that it's such a cult classic. And I can't believe I'm saying cult classic when I saw it in the cinema as a kid. But I'm sitting here now thinking, how do you even digest it, guys? How do you sit there and process it? Was it all too fast to even be able to kind of just actually realize what was really happening? Because it was fucking insane, wasn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. I mean, to this day, it sort of feels kind of surreal to me.
It's still insane. Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that we're still talking about this movie, this little movie we did 25 years later, and it really, I mean, there was sort of a point where at least for me anyway, that I felt like I really wasn't, necessarily, I wouldn't say involved, but just you're no longer in control of what's going on. And it just sort of takes
Yeah.
on a life of its own. And you're just sort of like, you've opened up this dam and now you're just in a boat in the water as it just rushes down
You
the
got no
river.
oar in
And
your
you're
hand, and you're
not
just
sure
like,
where
what
it's
the
going to
hell?
end up. You're just
Yeah.
along for the ride. Um, and yeah, it was a phenomenon. I mean, it was by any measure, not to sound like I'm, at the risk of sounding, kind of full of myself, but really, when you stand back and look at it, it's just a case study. Blair Witch just struck a chord worldwide. I mean, it's one of those experiences that I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me and they knew where they were at the time they
Yeah.
saw the movie. It's like the Challenger disaster. Everybody knew where they were when they saw this movie, and that doesn't happen very often. And I'm always sort of taken aback and humbled by when someone gives me their little anecdotal story about taking their friend, or when they saw it wherever they were when they first saw the movie. Not many movies have that kind of impact. And so I'm still sort of, as a student of film, and always will be, like, I look at it as an analysis. Like, really, I can see why people study this, because it's really had this incredible impact and comes along not very often. But also consider myself so fortunate and lucky that we were a part of it. And we just got lucky and hit the nail on the head with it. But yeah, it was and still is, kind of startles me when I like open up a book and I'm reading, an ebook or something, and someone references my movie, and or you hear it. I think I was watching the news the other day, and someone had mentioned it. Or sometimes I'll be watching someone else's movie, a well-known movie, and they'll reference Blair Witch in the film. Like, I just can't believe it. It's just hard to believe it had that much impact worldwide.
And now we sit here, and 25 years later, the absolute geniuses at Second Sight have taken on this title. And I'm not just saying this because I'm promoting it. Second Sight are doing the Lord's work for the
Yes.
community at home. To have stuff like Lake Mungo now available, to have The Hitcher, which is one of my favorite films ever made, now be restored in 4K. They are doing all they can to make sure that kind of physical media is still in everyone's hands. And I worry that sometimes, because of Spotify and the way that YouTube is, people forget that there's extras, there's commentaries, there's incredible outtakes, there's all this stuff that I used to adore with Arrow Film and early DVDs. So to have your title now next to the likes of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and all these classics, that must feel like a real fucking big pat on the back, and like I can't wait to have that in my hands.
Well, yeah, I mean, we were super excited. I mean, we've been talking about like a Criterion kind of version of Blair
Yeah.
Witch, and but Lionsgate, our co-producer Mike Manella was always kind of knocking on that door and saying, "Hey, Criterion, let's do it." But Lionsgate just didn't seem interested. And even like for the 25th anniversary, we reached out to them, last year, the year before, about like, with the 25th anniversary is coming up, do you guys want to do something? And we just got, radio silence from them. So it was cool. So we were like, how much are we going to fight for, for to make them more money? You know what I mean? Like, how much are we going to, not, try to, encourage them to, so that they can make more cash on our movie. But so when Second Sight approached us, we were like, yeah, and they have such a great reputation, and we love their CD, their DVDs and Blu-rays, and and physical media is important. Like, people don't realize, I think, that like when you buy digital media, sure, you buy it, but if the rights, something happens with the rights or whatever, they'll just pull it away, and you don't have you don't have it anymore. They don't have the rights to sell it to you anymore, and you're done. So physical media, you have it in your house. Nobody, unless somebody steals it, it's there.
Yeah.
And but just the love that they had for the movie, and the love that they've shown obviously for the other films, like you were saying. And just to be able to, like, and they kind of said, they were like, what do you guys want to do? Like,
I
what
love
would
that.
you do?
Yeah.
And we were like, well, the movie has never been seen, in the original format that it was shot in. And, that's kind of a cool thing. And so they were like, well, let's just retransfer. So we found the tapes, and we and they did the same thing with the 16 millimeter, and no hesitation. Like, they're like, yeah, just let's send it to New York, and they'll do it. They'll transfer it, and we'll, we use a place in New York, and let's do it. And then just like, what do you guys want, deleted scenes, maybe a documentary. So we had all this documentary footage of just the making of that has never been really seen. So they were just like kind of like perfect, and they're just super professional, and like you were saying, like they do things for the right reasons, for the love of cinema, and just to archive these things that, again, like Hitcher and all these other movies that, that only existed before in the very, early transfers that looked like crap. And now they're going back and retransferring everything from the original negatives and from the original tapes, and like the version of Blair Witch that's on this Blu-ray is, it's as good as it's going to get. Like,
Yeah.
it's straight off the high eights, it's straight off the 16 millimeter negative, and it really is the first time that, other than Dan and I, editing the movie, it's the first time it's been seen this way since we, finished editing the movie. So
I'm being told we've got to wrap up, but I have one final question for you both. What I do on this podcast to make it as original as I can is you both get to choose a song that means a lot to you. Everyone's done it that's been on the podcast. So as the interview's all ready to go out there and all edited, you both get to have a song that's played at the very end. Sometimes it's one guest, so it's just one song, but as it's two of you today, I'll be kind and give you a song each. But what's a song that means a lot to you? It can be any song by any band or any piece of music in the world that means a lot to you. I'm sorry to put you under pressure with about a minute to go, but let's do it.
well, Dan, it's going to be Billy Squire for you, right?
That's an inside joke. Um,
I mean, for me, even though, like, like there's, I mean, both Dan and I are music lovers. There's so many songs that we love, but for me, like, it's weird because there's my favorite artist was Prince, and his song 1999, I was a huge fan, and I love that song. And the fact that our movie came out in 1999, because that was always a date I was like, oh my god, the year 2000, how's life going to be? And early 80s, Prince is singing about partying in 1999, and then it just, that year just keeps popping in my head, as far as like, just how lucky we were to be part of that year of that had incredible cinema. Like, great movies came out that year, and just to be part of it. And every time I hear that song now, there's like another thing, like yeah, man, we, little did I know when I was a teenager listening to this song, that year was going to be so incredibly life changing to me.
How do you top that then, Dan? Have you got anything or?
I mean, there's so many songs, but I mean, like you two, Joshua Tree and Rattle and Hum, like
Unbelievable album, yeah.
still haven't found what I'm looking for. So, I played that endlessly in the car, and kind of went through a lot of trials and tribulations while that song was playing. So I think music has a lot to do with the timing when you hear it and at what stage in your life that you listen. But that certainly had a kind of a poignant place in my life, in my history, like back in those days with early you more popularized U2 when they came out with Joshua Tree and so yeah, that was formidable moment.
Thank you both. I'm very aware I'm out of time, but hopefully our paths will cross and come on for longer next time, because I'd love to carry on this chat. And Deb, thanks for making it happen.
Thank you, Mark. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you, man. Yeah, just reach out, and we're always around. So
lovely. Take care and good luck with the rest of the press. Thanks, guys.
You.
So there's my interview with both Eduardo and Daniel. Both absolute legends within horror, so insightful. It was a short interview, I do want longer, but obviously we were here to promote their brand new release of the Blair Witch Project through Second Sight. They bring you the best exclusive editions. They have 4Ks, Blu-ray box sets, and for me they're one of the best out there for physical media. And I believe that if you go and invest your money in the Blair Witch, see the making of documentary, behind the scenes, outtakes, commentary, it is unbelievable the work that Second Sight put in, and it's so good to see that Second Sight have now added the Blair Witch as part of their catalogue. I also want to say a massive thanks to both for coming on the podcast, and I do hope we can get you back in the near future to do a longer episode. You both sounded really up for it, so I'm going to be chasing you. I'm going to be getting you back on to talk about horror very soon. Also, if you've enjoyed today's episode and you're a huge fan of horror or a huge fan of the podcast, please carry on sharing it. I see so many people doing it. Each week I see more and more people sharing it on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and I really do appreciate it. So if you get the time just to hit that share button as you're listening right now, it goes a long way. I do also have a Patreon account. Each and every month I have to keep paying for putting the podcast on stuff like Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, also Spotify. It costs loads of money. So by supporting me on Patreon, you really do help the podcast. And there's a link on markandme.com to sign up to that. So please, if you're listening and enjoy the podcast, it really, really does help. And let's give a shout out to the other sponsor of the podcast, Richer Sounds. If you want to watch the Blair Witch on your brand new Blu-ray, why not get a new TV or a surround sound to feel the atmosphere of this horror? And the best way to do that is to go to Richer Sounds and speak to any of their experts on the high street, or just go on their website and you will not be disappointed. It's now only 3 episodes until episode 400. I'm so excited. And the good news is you'll only be waiting a couple of days till another brand new episode of Mark and Me. So until then, look after yourself. Go and buy the Blair Witch Project from Second Sight. Take care, and I'll speak to you all very soon.